Celestial mechanics, the power of words. Words have power. Consider our ancient forebears who first experimented with speech. Imagine the power they felt when making the sound that symbolized stop. Imagine the feeling of force that followed from the first order. Do that. Even simple sounds like a yes or a no can carry great weight. Consider the enormity of these simple sounds. I love you. Many words have so much power they are taboo. Some of these we today call curse words. To curse someone is to bring down destructive magic onto them. Sometimes we call these words swear words. To swear is to invoke a higher power external to ourselves. I swear on such and such. When we swear upon something, we claim a transcendent sacred authority and stand under it. The terms cursing and swearing are two of the many examples of a residue in modern English from a time when people had more thought for the power of words. They understood, stood under this concept. Words can have wonder power. They are spells. When we write, we are spelling, another residual term. In classical Greek, logos means thought, principle, or speech. In Greek philosophy, this term came to mean the creative power of God. This is the concept used in the New Testament at John 1:1, where logos is translated in English as word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. As the art of writing became more democratized, this specific aspect of sacred script was toned down, and the formerly powerful glyphs became simplified. The common people lost their connection to the mystical, wonder-working dimension of words. Our language today, however, still contains a reverence for speech that echoes some of the overt power that once was consciously attached to words. We have already encountered some of the many examples of God's voice and that of people compared in metaphor to a fire. To continue with this theme, we speak of being fired up or inflamed by our own or another's words. We talk of a fiery speech or words that burn. Fire is often compared in metaphor to our mouth. We describe a devouring or consuming fire. We explain that flames are licking their fuel. A more positive creative symbol of words connected to fire is in the New Testament at Acts 2:3-4. This is the description of the apostles' experience on the day of Pentecost. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. The connection to speech and fire is not confined to the Western tradition. In the Upanishads, which is the sacred writing of India, there is a description of the creation of the first archetypal person, where God brooded upon him. And when he had brooded him forth, a mouth split open like an egg. From the mouth came speech, and from speech, fire. The connection to our mouth and danger is obvious in the Hindu destroyer goddess Kali, whose exaggerated lips and tongue are red with the blood of her victims. The bright red hue might also remind one of fire. Using fire as a metaphor for speech opens many symbolic connections. As mentioned, a controlled fire can warm us and cook our food, thereby sustaining us. Out of control, however, fire can lay waste to our house and everything in it. This is an important aspect of the power of words for a thaumaturge to remember. The creation of speech and the ability to produce fire are two of the greatest milestones in the cultural evolution of people. Another connection tying these phenomena together, symbolically, is that their developments were such large steps forward that these may have left residual traces in what we may term our archaic memory. In the first half of the 20th century, the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung introduced the term collective unconscious into academic and clinical usage. There is nothing controversial about this concept. The science of neurology is based on the premise that people inherit not only a particular brain structure, but also a bedrock of mind that is common to all of us. The anthropologist Konrad Lorenz introduced a similar term, species-specific unconscious. It is at this level that any instincts or innate abilities such as language acquisition exist. We have many such mechanisms defaulted in the inherited layer of our unconscious. The connection between fire and speech illustrates the strong bond between our sometimes hot emotions and language. Especially in its most rudimentary forms, language operates out of emotion. This is to be expected when we consider that language is a tool of, and a catalyst for, relationship. We learn to talk to communicate our feelings and ideas with another. We cannot know for certain how language began, but a good guess would be that speech began with the imitation of the sounds around us. It would be unwise to make a sweeping statement to include all words, but it is a safe bet that the earliest vocabularies contained various levels of onomatopoeia. This is not so apparent in English, but it still can be demonstrated with other modern languages. The English words river and running convey some feeling of the movement of water, as does our word stream. More graphic examples are the sound of the words for stream in Italian, ruscello, and French, ruisseau. In German, a river is a Fluss, and rieseln means to drizzle, while rinnen and fließen mean to flow. Another obvious German example is Wasser, which has lost a lot of its flowing feeling in the English equivalent, water. The illustrations are not totally lost in English. Apart from the more intentionally onomatopoeic plop or splash, etc., we still have vestiges of this in words such as wash and rinse. Consider hard steel, soft cushion, harsh barking, banging hammer, splitting axe, or mushy marshmallow. I don't think I need to labor the point here. Language was originally a system of emotive sounds which, apart from naming everyday objects, has evolved primarily as a means to express our wonder, terror, fear, despair, humor, sadness, anger, love, ecstasy, and so on. It is reasonable to conjecture that our primitive ancestors, as they were developing and experimenting with speech, took from the natural sounds around them and imitated the elements, the rushing and roaring of the winds or oceans, the burbling, gurgling and bubbling of a river, the battering and drumming of raindrops and the rolling, rumbling and crashing of the thunder. The primitive palette of suitable sounds had an extensive reach, no doubt copying the cries of animals, the cluck and cackle of chickens, the howl of the roof, the cawing of a crow, and so on. The important point and common factor in inventing words was that the sound needed to contain the correct feeling and generate an appropriate reaction to whatever was being symbolically expressed. The next step in the development of language was that clusters of words with related meaning and similar effect began to be grouped together. The words themselves began to imitate and point to each other. All great storytellers understand this concept. Think of the name Darth Vader from George Lucas's Star Wars story. Darth reminds us subconsciously of death, dark, and dearth. These initial connections will trigger a secondary association to the similar sounding dirge and dirt. Vader evokes not only the more obvious invade, but also change, age, fade, and decay. These are all very suitable symbolic connections for an agent of the dark side of the Force. This aspect of wordsmithing is also obvious in ancient languages. In ancient Greek, the word for one's name is onema. This is related to the word for mind, nous. Both words come from gnesko, which means to come to know or understand. Another cognate in this series is nome, which means one's mental judgment, a thought, or an opinion. It's the modern word in English, gnome. Unlike nous, which is more intimately connected to the individual's personal identity, the term nome infers an autonomous aspect of certain thought structures where a concept or idea might appear to visit us from outside, like a divine hint. It is because of this latter dynamic that nome came to mean an axiom or maxim in academic language of the 20th century. The word nome has made its way at the popular level into modern languages such as English and German, where it means a creature of fantasy, as gnome. It was introduced by the Renaissance alchemist Paracelsus, where he used it as a synonym for pygmies in his 1566 book on nature spirits, nymphs, sylphs, pygmies, salamanders, and other spirits. Here he used the Latin variant nomos and described them as elementals, manifestations of the element of earth. Again, this is a concept carrying the idea that moods or thoughts might inspire us from outside. This is a very apt word when we consider that another Greek word, gnomos, which is also related to gnesko, means an earth dweller. So we see here, in the above examples from Greek and the closely related Latin, some very complex associations between certain words. The first level of this is that one's name is related to our mind and thinking, and by extension to our essence. Another connected word which complements this series is the Greek pneuma, which can mean wind as well as our breath and spirit. In the Hebrew Bible, wherever name, Shem, and no, Yada, appear together, then the implication is that knowing someone's name will lead to a deeper intimacy. This same concept is carried into the New Testament, where, in the demon exorcism episodes, a great emphasis is placed on knowing the name of the demon. Where the possession is called an unclean spirit in English, it is a translation of architasos pneuma. This means someone who has not been through the process of catharsis, which is an emotional purging or cleansing. The implication here is that the efficacy of the thaumaturgical cure is dependent on the exorcist having an intimate relationship with and knowing the sickness of their patient. They thereby facilitate the required purgation. In other words, these stories are illustrating the classic dynamics of what we would call today psychotherapy. To know someone's name, and especially the act of naming something, holds a special power in sacred texts. In the Hebrew Bible, the process of God naming something in Genesis 1 meant that that particular creation event was thereby completed. The Latin word for name is nomina. It is directly related to another important word here, which is the Latin numina. This latter word is a broad term to describe nature spirits or chthonic underworld deities in their various manifestations. In the Roman military cult, the numen were objectified in the standards such as the eagles that belonged to each legion. These totems represented special animals, and it was their spirit which would be shared with those who honored their power. In the 20th century, the word numen has been introduced into academic vocabulary via the German theologian Rudolf Otto in his book The Idea of the Holy. It was coined to describe the emotional feeling tone associated with certain religious experiences. All this points to a complex network of wonder-filled associations that are contained within the language, connecting one's name with their knowledge, soul, intuition, and so on. Our language is full of concepts of being inspired from emotion or thoughts that are visited upon us from outside ourselves. The word inspiration itself comes from the Latin inspirare, which was a compound of in and spiritus. It means to be filled with the divine spirit. Enthusiasm comes from the Greek enthusiasmos, which means to be filled with God. The root of this word being theos, God. In the classical period, both of these words were profoundly sacred and connected to initiation processes and mystery religions. Most of the ancient sacred words that carry this concept have fallen out of our modern languages, but there are still some living examples such as mania and ecstasy. In the original Greek, the New Testament is overflowing with these words, but their original meanings have been so watered down or lost altogether in modern translations that the writing that we read today is unrecognizable against the original. The English word ecstasy implies a state of being outside of normal consciousness and is linked to trance, frenzy, or rapture associated with mystic or prophetic exaltation, as well as loss of self-control. At Mark 5:42, in reaction to Jesus raising Jairus' daughter, the crowd is both exostemi and ecstasis. And straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. In Euripides' Bacchae at 850, existhemi is rendered by the English translator T.A. Buckley as dizzying madness. Although existhemi can, in some cases, be translated as amazed or astonished, the context in Mark would point to the stronger definitions of this word. It is interesting to note in this discussion that mania is also the root of the Greek mantano, which means to learn. The Greek word for learning has another form, mathema, and this is the root of the modern English word mathematics. These words are related to mathetes, which means a disciple or someone who is learning a spiritual path. We can clearly see that the ancient Greek language implicitly carried resonances that point to concepts such as divine mathematics or sacred geometry, both of which were directly connected to the theory of emanations. In his work on the migration of Abraham, Philo asks, how then should any good thing be wanting when the all-accomplishing God is at all times present with his graces? He continues in terms of the emanations and states that God pours his showers on us continually. Those who are open to this divine watering are compared to a fruitful womb. Philo then explains his own experiences of divine inspirations. Sometimes when I have come to my work empty, I have suddenly become full, ideas being in an invisible manner showered upon me and implanted in me from on high, so that through the influence of divine inspiration I have become greatly excited, and have known neither the place in which I was, nor those who were present, nor myself, nor what I was saying, nor what I was writing. For then I have been conscious of a richness of interpretation, an enjoyment of light, a most penetrating sight, a most manifest energy in all that was to be done, having such an effect on my mind as the clearest ocular demonstration would have on the eyes. Philo explains this again in his book, Who is the Heir of Divine Things? Now there is one kind of grace which is a sort of frantic delirium, causing infirmity of mind, either through old age or melancholy or some other similar cause. There is another kind which is excessive consternation, arising usually from things which happen suddenly and unexpectedly. Another kind is mere tranquility of the mind, arising when it is inclined by nature to be quiet. But that which is the best description of all is a divinely inspired and more vehement sort of enthusiasm, which the race of prophets is subject to. To end this chapter, it is worthwhile to point out that the Hebrew word for prophet is nabi. This word meant someone who was mentally unstable to the point of delirium and hallucination. The many anthropological works that we have on the subject also point to the same situation regarding those who, in primal cultures, are chosen as shamans. In all other cultures outside of the modern industrialized West, the worldview of the people is one overflowing with agents from the invisible world. It is only in our present culture that the experience of such forces is considered, at least as far as the dominant culture is concerned, to be symptoms of a psychological sickness that should be healed away. While these experiences can be, and very often are, quite disturbing for the recipient, while they are often born out of trauma and unresolved emotional damage, the most important aspect that our modern culture has ignored or forgotten is that these implosions from the invisible world are bringing with them the potential for the healing of the individual and even their wider community. This healing, however, is dependent on our willingness to understand and embrace the episodes as such.